I have some Burt's Bees lip balm if you want to put it under your eyes.
This is just really hard.
Maybe turn it that way.
Framing's good. Good enough.
All right. Showing up just to, not see like racist, sexist, homophobic people that I was surrounded with in Indiana. And once I got there, the big shock was like, oh yeah, we aren't talking about that because we're super focused on farming or super focused on the business or super focused on different aspects of like materially making this community work. I'm Joston Hill and I live in Asheville, North Carolina.
That's perfect. All right. How were you raised? How was your family life growing up? How would you describe that?
Family life, pretty good. Nothing too wild to report there. Just standard little white boy American upbringing in, northern Indiana. I don't know. I didn't really struggle with, working 40 hours a week at 19 or having hours and hours of schoolwork. I actually did not do well in college. I had a really hard time with taking it seriously, considering I had a full ride and didn't know what I was doing with it. So, yeah, I didn't care. And I spent a lot of my time doing extracurriculars, hanging out with my friends.
How did you learn about Eastwind?
I learned about Eastwind through circumstances of being in college and having my professor in an English class prompt me to study whatever you want for the entire semester. Just give me a paper on it. And at the time, I was, freshman in college, didn't really know what I was doing there, had a scholarship, but not really a whole lot of direction, taking a lot of like liberal arts classes, philosophy, sociology, English, whatever. And ended up just studying alternative living situations, like everything from intentional communities to eco-villages and squats, co-ops, co-housing, things like that. And towards the end of the semester, actually, I'm pretty sure like probably 4 or 5 weeks in, I was just studying Eastwind. I'd boiled it down to the fact that like egalitarian intentional communities made a lot of sense to me. And at that point, I was so invested. I was basically shopping between like Acorn and Eastwind. And so I came to intentional communities through intense Googling.
What was that moment where you're like, all right, I'm going to put in for a visitor letter and I'm going to go to this place and check it out? What led to that decision?
I'm actually not sure there was a major catalyst or like huge, eureka moment around being like, this is what I have to do and this is what I'm going to do. I just didn't like college. I didn't like living in Indiana. I didn't like a lot of things about what was going on at, being a directionless teen. Because, I was like 19 at the time. And quite frankly, I just didn't feel like Indiana or anything I was doing was exciting. And it's not necessarily that, like, intentional communities, Eastwind particular, like, was like, yes, this is it, as much as it was like, this is something, and this is not Indiana, and I'm gonna pack my bags and go. Yeah, I did. I interviewed a member living there. We talked on the phone for maybe like an hour or two about questions I had, or me trying to fill content for my school papers. But I'd say it was very affirming to talk to a member there and humanize somebody who is living there, get that context of, yeah, people, pretty normal people live there, and they have pretty down-to-earth things to say about it.
That September 2012 visitor period, a lot of those people became longer-term members, right? You and your partner were there for at least 4 years.
Yeah. No, I also remember our visitor period was one of the larger visitor periods they'd seen in a really long time. I want to say it was like close to a dozen people. And yeah, most of them stayed there for at least half or most of the 6 or 7 years I was there. And I remember like talking to a lot of people when I got there, saying like, wow, this is such a big visitor period, but you know how visitor periods go, people get excited and then burnt out and leave. But for some reason, everybody on my visitor period was very interested in staying, and yeah, I made absolutely like lifelong connections with a lot of those people on my visitor period.
Any memorable events from your visitor period or the first couple of months that you were at Eastwind?
I mean, I'd say the most memorable thing of it all was just showing up and being so taken aback by how, like, my familiarity with intentional communities was, like, Googling and doing papers and seeing everything in, like, text format and thinking, like, oh, this sounds really nice, but who knows? And, yeah, upon arrival, just totally blew me away. And yeah, even during my visitor period, I had so many moments of just being like, I'm gonna live here for the rest of my life. This is so perfect and great. And yeah, I mean, my entire visitor period was just a incredibly rosy-eyed view of the whole situation.
Did you immediately start living at Eastwind, or did you leave for the wintertime?
Oh, no, I stayed.
You were there through that winter. Yeah, talk about maybe just what were the biggest surprises or shocks coming from your Midwest small town background.
I mean, I'd say the biggest, shock to me was just that I studied Eastwind, and I looked at egalitarian communities from the perspective of wanting to see, this like utopia of people getting along and, cooperating, things of that nature. It was a very like social perspective. And when I got there, I'd say I was really taken aback by how much it's a lot about like working on the land and working together, and the social aspects of like cooperating and getting along is like pretty understood and very, it's not something that's like majorly discussed, which also can kind of cause problems down the line in certain aspects. But I didn't realize how much I enjoyed farming and how much I enjoyed like working with plants, working with animals, doing things outside. Like that was not on my radar when I showed up. I was showing up just to, not see like racist, sexist, homophobic people that I was surrounded with in Indiana. And once I got there, the big shock was like, oh yeah, we aren't talking about that because we're super focused on farming or super focused on the business or super focused on different aspects of like materially making this community work. And yeah, not something I was completely expecting, but super ready to jump into once I realized that was the game.
You started out working in the garden primarily? Were you working with animals when you first got there?
I actually started working in aquaponics, which was a very interesting sort of side project of a member living there who'd been living there far before me. And he was very dedicated to aquaponics and he was ready to save the world with aquaponics. And quite frankly, I walked in and saw an absolutely wild science experiment sort of thing going on, and not a lot of people really invested in it. And, realized later down the line that was more due to the social implications of this member and maybe their hubris. But no, I got started in aquaponics, and it was absolutely fascinating and got me started on like way more different aspects of growing food. But yeah, for I'd say maybe like the first year, I can't even remember, I just spent a lot of time in the aquaponics greenhouse, like sucking fish poop out of hoses and making sure that little heads of lettuce were properly draining in their beds. And
what agricultural skills do you most value that you picked up at Eastwind?
I mean, there's not really one I can pin down, just because I say the nature of working with nature is very diverse, and there are things that I apply to gardening today that I picked up in the forestry department, or aspects of, proper tree management and planting arrangements that I learned from ranch. And all of these things are incredibly connected, and as much as I'd like to rah behind one of these departments, I'd say they're all very connected, and none of them should be taken for granted in terms of how they apply to each other.
You started tattooing at Eastwind, and maybe just talk about tattooing and tattoo culture at Eastwind.
Tattooing at Eastwind. I did start tattooing at Eastwind, and it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Basically, there was some equipment laying around from an ex-member that was told to me to be pretty trusty, and I was invited to learn from another member there who had told me they'd spent years in New York working in a shop and had tons of experience, and that person really didn't teach me anything. I really picked up a lot more of how I learned to do that from other artists that I traveled through, and the internet, and even then wasn't great, but I definitely made a lot of friends happy by giving them very free or very cheap art for their bods.
Is that what it was called? Mystery Tat?
The Mystery Tat started from a friend of mine named Rishi feeling super bored and saying, "Hey, just blindfold me. Give me whatever you got." And I blindfolded this person, gave them a tattoo. They got super excited about it. And somehow it spread that this was a service I offered. And next thing you know, I've got a line of people hoping to get the bandana around their eyes. and artist choice, which I'd say there was probably only one where an unsatisfied customer walked away. But fortunately, they came to terms with what I chose. I would say being in a relationship and community is very different than being in a relationship, outside of community, because community is one of those things that can like expose, issues that you can kind of hide in this social situation versus this social situation. And I'd say the way communal life is like so interconnected, you can't really like pretend to be this person over here and then be somebody else over here. The same way your relationship issues can't be, put on display over here and then problematic in like another corner. You're gonna have to like come to realization or like come to terms with how you act as a person and how you act as a couple, if that's your arrangement, through a lot of different dynamics in communal living. And it's going to bring a lot of stuff up. It's going to bring a lot of stuff to the surface. And yeah, I'd say going through some different relationships in community and spending time single, it doesn't really allow you I don't want to say privacy, but like maybe like secrecy or a way to sort of brush things under the rug with certain groups of people and not others. Like you're in a certain way, like you're on display like 24/7. And if you have problematic ways of dealing with yourself as an individual or dealing with your partner in relationships, or those things are public. And you are very public. I would say one of the major communication breakdowns I constantly saw was basically just passive aggressiveness. And I don't mean to like lump them all together, because obviously a lot of issues I saw were very dynamic and unique, but I think there's a tendency in community to be able to sort of, I don't know, there's like still a sense of apathy almost in the fact that we can retreat as community members into things we tell ourselves about how we're living in community and how we're living egalitarianly, closer to the land. And, there's there are means for people to become apathetic about really intense communication issues that should be addressed non-violently in some way, shape, or form. But unfortunately, not a ton of people who live in community are very well versed in nonviolent communication. It's not something that's taught while you're in community if you're not seeking it out personally. So we're left to our communication style baggage of when we came there if we're not working on it. And unfortunately, that can lead to a lot of passive aggressiveness or aggressive aggressiveness. And there's not a lot of great outlets if people aren't really willing to seek mediation or seek therapy or seek more, positive, beneficial ways of coming to resolutions. And it's a shame because I definitely witnessed a lot of situations where I felt like people should have sat down and talked to each other directly in, compassionate ways or open and honest communication styles. Anything better than what they were doing, but unfortunately, yeah, occasionally you will find people who would much rather communicate through passive-aggressive notes or gossiping, or in very, very rare cases, physically intimidating others, or, kind of going off the handle and, venting in a pretty toxic way.
A lot of people who decide to live there experience the rose-colored glasses, a visitor period. They're excited. It's a different life. It's all new. Talk about, when did those rose-colored glasses, stop being so rosy, and how was that transition?
There wasn't really an event as much as it was just sort of a slow whittling down of the place being like magical to actually pretty realistic. And I also don't want to say like, my rosy glasses came off and I was like, oh, I saw this place for the horrible place it was. Like, I don't think anything about Eastwind is like horrible or anything. I'm not bitter. I don't have harsh feelings or anything, but there was a slow realization that it's a lot of people trying to figure themselves and each other out on a random piece of land in the Ozarks.
What is your opinion of Eastwind nut butters?
As far as companies go and, CEO to worker inequality, like, it's non-existent at Eastwind, and I think it sets a prime example for what unions could do or how workplaces should be organized. Am I not pumped about, nuts coming in from South America to be milled so that they can be shipped to California? Like, yeah, that's not super exciting, but I'm really happy that it affords the people there the lifestyle that they chose.
What did you like best about living at Eastwind?
Honestly, the interconnectedness of all the aspects of my life in terms of work, play, passions, priorities. Like, these are things I have to find time for nowadays. Not living in community. Like I said, I'm 28 years old, and this is my first time, like, paying rent and getting a paycheck and making ends meet and making time for friends. And honestly, I really just kind of miss the holistic connectedness of it, in terms of I can work with my friends while getting a workout, while making great food for my community. Like, there's a lot of things that I'd say I'm trying to, like, isolate and make time for in my life now that would have come naturally, and probably piggybacking off another benefit or, value of life that I'm also seeking. And I'd say the ease of seeing all those things come together in a single day, when, I might go to bed thinking I just got up and did some ranch chores and helped out in the garden and, hung out with my friends, and maybe I didn't feel like I did a whole lot, but man, if I tried to do that right now, I would have to make time for work, and then make time for friends, and then make time for, community volunteer work, and then make time for myself. And I'd say the way activities for myself and for my community were able to just seamlessly mesh together was, it is something I miss. I would say the thing that aggravated me the most, and I'm sure I know a lot of other members felt this way, but it was just watching burnout and watching people getting excited about projects that seemed unanimously beneficial or positive, like setting up a new building or, having a tree planting program or just about anything, and watching these things fizzle out, or other members telling them they were wasting their time. And at the end of the day, it would all just sort of amount to or result in these embers of apathy where people got excited and just didn't do anything about it. And then at the end of the day, we're all sitting around talking about, where we're going to put all our energy tomorrow, or why we're excited about living here, what we want to do, and hearing ideas and hearing people get excited, and then kind of watching nothing happen. For the most part, pretty much everybody there isn't a bigot, and you're not going to hear super off-color stuff going to get lunch or dinner, but the work wasn't really being done there. And I remember when I left, before I left, I had actually made pretty close friends with a member who was, person of color, and another member who was identified as trans. And I'd say these were my closest friends I'd ever made within those distinctions or categories. And yeah, after I left, they communicated with me about pretty intense racism and transphobia that they were confronted with. And it was kind of heartbreaking to realize how much or how apathetic people at East Wind were to those issues, which really made me reconsider a lot of what I thought about egalitarianism and the people who are attracted to it, mostly, white middle-class people, and realizing how much little effort they put into dismantling the racism that members were confronted with, or the transphobia that members were confronted with. It was pretty heartbreaking to me, and really upsetting, considering the fact that it's labeled as an egalitarian community, and I didn't see people putting in the work to dismantle the things keeping us from becoming egalitarian, which I think is, a lifelong work, especially if we're coming from, a xenophobic capitalist society and not checking our baggage at the door. So that definitely made me reconsider a lot about egalitarianism.
The other aspect of egalitarianism, I guess, that I think about is an hour of labor is an hour of labor, no matter what the labor is.
Do I think the labor system of East Wind was effective? Yeah, honestly, because quite frankly, I didn't really see major projects being taken on where, if there was a call for all hands on deck, enough people wouldn't show up. And especially since leaving, I've realized even more how much all labor is equal. From the person in the middle of the pandemic working at Kroger without hazard pay, that work is equal to a sex worker running an OnlyFans. And a doctor on the front lines or an Uber Eats driver. I do believe all labor is equal, and I do see a lot of labor that was done at Eastwind that could have been shunned as not as important because they weren't waking up to milk cows super early, but I did see them putting in work in social committee things that were taken for granted, or making rope sandals or something else that, may not have been the poster for the brilliance of our labor, but was absolutely just as unique and important and, completely valid.
If you could wave a magic wand and change a single thing about Eastwind culture or a specific thing in the bylaws or rules of Eastwind, would you change anything? And what would that thing be?
No. No. No, it's a very democratic place, and sure, if I could wave a magic wand and make everybody super into what I want to see Eastwind grow into, yeah, but I'm not a fascist.
What were your visions, ambitions for yourself and for Eastwind, and how did that change in the 7 years you were there?
I would say my ambitions for myself and Eastwind changed like year after year. Honestly, I don't really think I was worth my weight in nut butter for the first probably like 3 years I was there. I met quota, but I really don't think that I was bringing my full self and ambition to the table until the end, where I really saw the community for what it provided me and internalized that and wanted to give something back until maybe like the third or fourth year I was there. I also think it had a lot to do with the fact that I discovered more regenerative, food foresty, permaculture-y kind of things, and absolutely blew my mind, and really made me excited to want to sculpt the community in that way, or do projects within that vein of regenerative agriculture, which was already happening in a lot of different ways, and made me more excited about things I was just already doing. But I'd say it wasn't really until like towards the end there where I kind of saw my ambitions hitting up against a wall in terms of what I was excited about and what I saw the community getting excited about, and realized I was sort of talking to a wall in a certain sense. Yeah, I'd say just apathy overcame in myself and other people.
Why did you leave Eastwind?
I didn't exactly leave for... It wasn't like a big emotional journey decision as much as it was there was an opportunity to go work a different farm somewhere else, do something different for a minute. I think I remember at the time I told myself I was, I'm gonna go associate, so I can come back for a couple months. Like I wasn't trying to like totally break ties, but at the time I was just ready to do something different for a minute. Life's short. Been there for like 7 years. I've spent most of my adult life, from the age of 19 to 26 at Eastwind, and yeah, an opportunity came up. I took it.
Is alcoholism and substance abuse a serious problem at Eastwind?
Yes and no. I would say, no, it's just yes. I don't know. I could say that people are just having fun, having a drink at the end of the day, but I mean, it's a pretty slippery slope if you're living there. Like, I never drank as much as I did in community, and it was a very nightly ritual, a very nightly form of escapism. It wasn't, at the end of the night in community, we all don't get together in a circle and play Rosebud Thorn about how we felt about the day. We just sit down and start drinking and making jokes, and that can go a lot of different ways by the time it hits midnight. And I would also say it leads to I would also say it's a very major signal of the fact that people struggle with putting in work there emotionally. People at Eastwind are very hard physical workers, but I think as a place that it advertises itself as an egalitarian community that should be putting in more work to break down our systemic, phobias and social barriers, a lot of people at Eastwind struggle with just being themselves at the end of the night. And I was definitely one of those people. I mean, I still am in a few ways. But yeah, I mean, does Eastwind have drinking and substance abuse problems? I mean, I could pass it off and say, no, they're surviving, they're fine, they're making it. But, I think when the goal is to be this, egalitarian, close to the land example for the rest of the world, then yeah, it's not a great example. It's not a solution, for sure. I'd say there's a lot of work to be done in at least that department, not to mention many others.
What were the greatest lessons that you learned about yourself?
I would say some of the biggest lessons I've learned about myself and other people is sort of just how human we all are. I would say before coming there, I was 19, still had huge self-image ideas of myself as, just a kid, and moved there and saw a lot of human vulnerability, people making mistakes, people being honest about it, and as someone who was 19, realizing I am also one of these people, and this isn't something I need to hide. This is something we all need to be very honest about and deal with. And I'd say dealing with those hard truths to this day, and dealing with the honesty of what it means to be human with everybody, and not hiding it during business calls and being loud about it when you're in a public park, or like I was saying earlier about the interconnectedness of everybody doing everything all the time. Nobody's perfect.
Talk about the network that you have after having left.
Yeah. Now I live in Asheville, North Carolina. Moved here alone or with my partner or without a social network in any way. And yeah, since then, past members, ex-members of Eastwind, members that I lived with while I was there, members I'm very close with, great friends, have all joined the area. And yeah, Eastwind is definitely still a major part of my social network, also my material network in terms of how I know people who are connected with other projects, other communities, other places of interest. And I would say Eastwind was a major networking opportunity, I guess, in terms of, and I don't mean that in like a slimy businessy or business term or anything. I just mean like I met great people and they have amazing interests and passions, and they've all scattered across the country doing amazing projects that are still incredibly interesting to me. And I feel very lucky that I met these people and that they share my passions. And now I do feel like I have a little red book of people all across the country doing great projects, people I could reach out to, people who understand what we went through. And yeah, it's a really great network.
Would you live in a income sharing commune again?
Absolutely. No, I still think intentional, egalitarian communal living makes a ton of sense to me. There was never a point where, despite its problems and despite its flaws and setbacks and everything, no, it still makes a ton of sense to me. And I would say since moving away and, living here in Asheville, North Carolina, paying rent, getting a paycheck for like the first time in my life, like I've actually started to realize much more harshly the things I was very against as a 19-year-old before I moved there. I was, as a 19-year-old who wanted to see an egalitarian community, I had not quite realized the struggles of income inequality, healthcare, renters' rights, workers' rights, and a lot of other very technical things that you wouldn't really be cued into unless you were a worker of the world. And as somebody who's making ends meet, paying rent, and trying to live the best life they can, definitely experiencing a good share of hegemonic angst towards our capitalist society. But these were all things I had notions of at a 19-year-old, but they are absolutely gruesome to see